Hello there, kia ora. Yesterday, the government decided to finish the parliamentary term for the year by leaving us a great big present, much like a giant turd underneath a Christmas tree, with the announcement of the worst recession the country has ever been in since 1991, back when Jim Bolger and Ruth Richardson were in charge. That recession back then was pretty nasty. It led to something called euthanasia, the worst budget that we've ever seen in terms of outcomes, particularly for people who are on low incomes at the time or needing some sort of help from the government in that safety net that we call a welfare system, which this government, much like that one, is completely ignoring. Now, the recession itself has been caused by a couple of different factors, mostly a reduction in spending in our GDP towards manufacturing and construction, two industries which this government has gone out of its way to cause issues with. Construction in particular is one that the government was a big organization behind trying to fund and suddenly dried that all up. The construction industry is suffering at the moment. There are, of course, other areas as well which have led to this particular drop, and a 1% drop in our GDP is absolutely massive. We haven't seen anything like this in close to 40 years. But it's not the fault of the previous government. Information that's been released by Treasury show us that the amount of money that's been borrowed versus what our GDP growth is has been pretty consistent over the last 30 to 40 years, with increases in the amount borrowed generally going up under the National Party and the Labour Party generally paying that off, with the exception of what was borrowed over the COVID period to pay for things like businesses to stay afloat and people not to die. But of course, we don't have that as an issue now. People are allowed to die anytime that they want because, as you know, this government doesn't fund health all that well. So yes, we have got one of the worst recessions seen in living memory for a number of people. It set up the perfect conditions for people to up and leave the country, for our economy to fall to pieces, and for them to start talking about privatisation. But government finished for the week today. So that's probably not going to be something that happens until next year. But next year, it's certainly not going to be a conversation that they have at Waitangi, as the Prime Minister has confirmed he will not be going there after opening the Pandora's box that was David Seymour's Treaty Principles Bill. So, of course, he's not going to show it to somewhere like Waitangi because he knows, one, he's used his speech there 3 times in a row now and people are probably going to pick up on it. And 2, he is going to be the most vilified person in the entire country if he does show up because he has done the worst job on race relations of any Prime Minister we have seen in close to 50 years. And he knows all this because he gets told this constantly. But no, he is still the Prime Minister, and until he decides to step down, we're going to have to deal with the kind of bullshit that we're seeing right now, repeated over and over. And while we might sit here and say, yeah, this is a recession and we've dealt with these things before and we can get through it again, there are questions out there that people aren't asking. Like, why does the Ministry of Regulation, the ministry which has the highest pay rate of any public services in the country, have 90 staff at the moment? 90. That's a huge number of people just hanging around who aren't doing particularly much because the ministry is still finding its feet and being set up. It's really problematic. In fact, when it comes to regulation, that is a big issue that we need to be really concerned about. In about 3 weeks' time, the submissions close on the Regulation Submissions Committee bill. So you can find that on the parliamentary website. That's a bill that would give David Seymour, as the Minister of Regulation, unfettered access to demand which bills do and don't go through because it all fits within his quote-unquote regulatory framework, which isn't defined and completely devoid of any access from the courts. That's another great big Christmas present that's been left for us, like a turd underneath the Christmas tree from this government. Overall, it's been a really terrible year for the government, but you wouldn't know it looking at the media, but you would know it by the way that people are feeling things, and by the fact that we are in the worst recession that we've seen since 1991. Wait, you're still here? It's over. Go find another video.